Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for an evening of horrifying tales that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. Last week, we played a game. Of the 10 stories we featured, one of them was a lie. Story number 6, an unusual purchase, was fabricated. Did you guess the answer correctly? Let us know in the comments. This week, we have a few new stories to share, followed by a review of some of our favorites. If you have a story to share, be sure to reach out via the details listed in the description below. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. All of these actions tell YouTube you want to hear more from us. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1. The Invisible Attacker. This incident happened approximately 15 years ago, and it still really bothers me when I think about it. I haven't told many people, but I'd like to share my experience now with anyone who may be interested. At the time, I worked the night shift in the warehouse of a printing factory. I would clock in at 3:30 p.m., so I would usually wake up at noon. And this day was supposed to be like any other typical workday. I had just woken up to my alarm, and like most people, I went straight to the restroom. To help you visualize this, I need to explain that in this restroom, the back of the toilet isn't against a wall like most restrooms. The back is against the side of the clothes dryer. The only thing in front of the toilet is the sink area. There's a wall right next to the toilet on the right side, there's open space to the left of the toilet, and the rest of the room is behind you when you're on the toilet. About only 20 seconds after I sat down on the toilet, I was struck from behind on my left shoulder blade, scapula area. It felt like I had gotten punched very hard while simultaneously stabbed deep with a knife. The force was strong enough to shove me forward, causing me to lose my balance and almost slide off the toilet. I screamed out in pain and fear as I reached forward to the sink countertop to catch myself out of reflex. Terrified, I swiftly turned to look behind me, but no one was there, and the door to the restroom was still closed. There was nowhere to hide in this room either. If someone was there, I would have been able to see them easily from where I was. I was absolutely dumbfounded and panicked, just panting and looking around wildly for an explanation. I think I yelled, "What the fuck?" over and over. I tried to quickly finish up, but it became apparent that my shoulder blade had been injured pretty badly because I was in a great deal of pain. Lifting, reaching, pulling, anything with my left arm was agonizing. Simply letting my arm dangle and even breathing was painful. My job was very physical, and there's no way I would have been able to do most of my job in this condition. Despite the medical bill I'd be facing, my job required doctor's notes to allow unscheduled time off, so I had to go in to see a doctor. The joy of being an American. I didn't want to wait several days for an appointment with my primary physician, so I went to the emergency room. I explained the bizarre situation to the nurse, who didn't seem fazed by my story, and she had me do a CT scan of my upper back. Eventually, the doctor came to my ER room to see me, and this is when it gets frustrating. The doctor visually examined my left shoulder blade and noted that it was swollen, but there was no noticeable redness or bruising. He then informed me that the CT scan showed 3 bone bleeds, aka bone bruises, but no fractures. The doctor asked me to again explain what caused my injury, and I did. He calmly listened, but to my surprise, he then accused me of being a victim of abuse and lying about it. I know most people are skeptics with paranormal things, but I really didn't see that accusation coming. I defended myself against his accusations, telling him I was home alone and I'm not even in a relationship. I told him if he was correct, I would press charges and not make up a story about an invisible attacker. He became quite rude and was obviously angry with me, convinced I was stubbornly lying. He even sent in a social worker to come interview me, which I didn't even know was a thing at clinics and hospitals, but apparently it is. So I had to explain this bizarre event again, facing ridicule yet again. It was really upsetting, making a strange incident even worse. I wished I had made up some story about falling down or tripping into something, or maybe a sporting injury, but it hadn't occurred to me to lie. Eventually, I left with basic pain medication and instructions to rest my shoulder and apply ice. I was given a doctor's note to excuse my absence from work for a few days, and had a follow-up appointment with my primary doctor a couple days later. I have known my primary doctor for many years, and we're on great terms. I was a bit nervous to tell her how the injury occurred because of how things went at the ER, and I didn't want her to think I've gone crazy. I was hoping she could come up with a medical cause to this. There had to be something, right? She examined me while I told her about the incident. She asked questions about any past injuries to that area. There had been none. Asked about my typical physical activities, any atypical activities, family history, and checked the blood tests she requested beforehand for any bleeding or clotting issues. We couldn't come up with anything. That made me feel validated, but so very confused. After all, no one ever gets assaulted and injured by nothing. I told her what the ER doctor put me through, and that's when she told me she believed me. She admitted she couldn't determine the cause of my injuries, because an impact hard enough to make bones bleed would leave external physical signs like bruises and redness. Plus, she knows I'm outspoken and feisty and wouldn't tolerate being mistreated. And she trusts me because I'm always honest about my medical issues, even when it's embarrassing or awkward. Then she told me that in her culture, they believe in ghosts and spirits, and she knows others whom she trusts that have had unexplainable experiences. Honestly, that comforted me so much, because I was starting to feel crazy. Sometimes when you experience something so strange, you can really question yourself and doubt yourself, and I was starting to do that. But the CT scan of the bone bleeds helped me say, I did not imagine this. This really did happen to me. Thankfully, it never happened again, and I moved out of that place eventually. In truth, many strange things happened in that restroom throughout the years. I had to do physical therapy for my shoulder blade, and it did get better, but unfortunately, I still have continued pain and occasional limitations when it gets rough. Thank you for reading my story. I would really love to know if any of you have had an injury or physical attack that failed to have an explainable cause. Story 2. Visiting the Grandkids. I never met my father-in-law. He passed away 5 years before I met my wife. If he were alive today, he would have 9 grandchildren, including my kids. However, he only got to meet 2 of them in his lifetime. There's a framed picture that my wife keeps on her nightstand next to her side of the bed, of him dancing with her when she was 15 or 16. They are both looking at the camera, his head tilted back a little, with a larger-than-life smile. It's one of those pictures that brings a smile to your face, even if you don't know the person in it. There's a copy of that picture, and many similar ones, at my mother-in-law's house. They all have the same theme, him and his contagious smile. By all accounts, he was always the life of the party, would get people to dance and be cheerful. He was also a devoted family man, and he was thankful that he got to enjoy time with his 2 granddaughters while battling the disease that eventually took him away. Fast forward 18 years. All the grandkids are home, including the 2 oldest ones, who now live away to attend college. We had a potluck at my mother-in-law's home, and my kids were just thrilled to see their older cousins. Although the age gap between the oldest kid and the youngest is 15 years, they all get along well, and the oldest ones are just sweethearts about playing and entertaining their younger relatives. At my eldest child's insistence, we invited all 9 kids for a sleepover at our house. We ordered pizza and set up a bunch of air mattresses and video games for the kids to enjoy in my daughter's bedroom. Of course, no adults were allowed. Just some background information. My house was built in 2014 on empty land, and it was rented out to a couple families before us, so there's no weird history here. The layout of the house has 3 bedrooms upstairs. As soon as you come up from the stairs, there's the master bedroom to the right and the 2 other bedrooms to the left. If the master bedroom door is open, you get a clear view of our bed as soon as you hit the upstairs landing. Likewise, if you are in my bed, you can see whoever is coming up the stairs. That evening, after the kids shut themselves up in their pajama party, my wife was doing chores while I was watching TV from my bed. I normally close my door when I watch TV, as I am very conscious about my kids not being exposed to content inappropriate for their age. However, as my wife kept coming in and out of the bedroom, she just left the door open at some point. I'm not sure about the exact time. It must have been 9 or 10 p.m. when I noticed someone coming up the stairs. It was not a shadow, it was not a see-through figure. It was a person, with the sound of the steps and everything. As soon as the person got to the landing, I could fully see him and realized that it was my father-in-law, my deceased father-in-law. He was not scary or disfigured like a zombie on TV. He looked exactly like the guy in the picture, and he had that smile, that disarming smile. Surprised, I just stared at him for a while and then decided to greet him aloud. "Hello, mister. How are you?" Stupid question. He could have come back with a burn and replied, "Dead." He had that kind of humor, from what I'm told. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm here to visit the kids," he replied, in what I assume was his voice, since I had never met him or seen videos of him. "Okay," I said. He just nodded and moved over toward the kids' bedroom. I didn't hear anyone screaming in the bedroom, so I figured I was the only one who saw him. I paused the show and debated whether to tell my wife about what had just transpired. She gets really freaked out when these things happen to me, and she is still overly sensitive about her father. However, her supernatural ability is to see right through me, so she could tell something was up. I decided to tell her straight up what happened. She followed with an avalanche of questions, but she was quite calm about it. I told her what he looked like, what he was wearing, and his demeanor. I also told her that we had both spoken aloud as far as I knew, and that I had heard his voice. It had not been some sort of mental conversation. His lips even moved and everything. Tears began rolling, and as I comforted her, she began crying about her frustration of not being the one who had seen him, since she was his daughter after all. I had no reply for that, other than to share the genuine feeling that I got from him, that he loved them and watched over them. My wife calmed down after a few minutes and then went to bed. She asked me not to say anything to the kids or the in-laws. I was ahead of her in that sentiment. We ended up telling them later, and they all shared stories about how they, at some point or another, felt his presence, but nothing with the certainty that I was relating. I was glad to have met him, and I believe that we could have gotten along very well. I caught a glimpse of the feeling that everyone who knew him shares about him, that he was a kind, warm, fun-loving person. I hope my children, his grandchildren, share those traits and values. Story 3. Ghost Stories from an Irish School. I'm a teacher in Ireland, and my old school has so many ghost stories, each of them centering around a particular room. I hope you enjoy. I will not be using real names in these stories. Most of the stories come from the caretaker, Alan, as he is most often in the school late. These stories are in no particular order and told by him. In the past in my old school, students used to participate in a school sleepover to raise money for homeless charities. However, one year there was an incident, and the event was never repeated again. The students who were sleeping in room 10 ran out of the room screaming during the night and had their parents collect them early. Nobody knows for sure what happened, but after this, the event was never repeated. The next story comes from an SNA, special needs assistant, called Sarah. Sarah was helping clean up the school at the end of the day. She was in room 10 sweeping up when she swears she saw the face of a nun in the reflection in the mirror. She told a few people, but convinced herself it was her mind playing tricks. A few weeks later, the students opened a time capsule that was buried and contained pictures of the school when it was opened. One of those pictures was the nun Sarah claimed to see, and she fainted upon seeing the picture. This story was told to me by Alan, and I asked about it, and Sarah backed it up. The next story comes from Alan himself. Alan was in the building late at night because the burglar alarm went off. He walked around the building and noticed one of the emergency exits was open. After closing it, he went around the building to check that everything was in order. As the clock struck 12, the door to the lift opened up. Alan ran from the building without resetting the alarm. There's yet another story from Alan. Room 10 was an upstairs room, and Alan was downstairs alone cleaning up. He heard chairs being moved in room 10, as if a class had just ended. He went upstairs to see who was there, but all the chairs in room 10 were up on the table where they were supposed to be. Eventually, management decided that the staff room should be expanded, and they did this by knocking down the wall between the staff room and room 10. Room 10 was no longer a classroom, but strange things continued to happen in the corner of the staff room that was formerly room 10. The next story is from a teacher called Kara and an SNA called Rose. Kara always came to work very early and was usually the first person in the building. As she was walking in, she could see a light in the staff room and a figure by the printers. The printers are located where room 10 used to be. She was confused as there were no other cars, but nonetheless went inside anyway. Kara got into the staff room and the lights in the staff room were off. She didn't bother whoever was by the printer and sat down, but could still hear paper rustling. Eventually, the SNA Rose came in, and Kara asked her who was by the printers. Rose said there was nobody there. The next story comes from another teacher called Emma. Emma came into work early one day, and just like Kara, she entered the staff room and turned the lights on. Emma saw a figure down beside the printers, doing work. She said hello, and that was all. She turned to make a cup of tea, and when she turned around again, the figure was gone. Those are all of the stories I was told. Alan told me all of them one day, and they were backed up by everyone else. I never made any observations myself, but there was one moment where I had a feeling something was wrong. There was a school musical, and I was working with it. I went for a little coffee break in the staff room around 9 p.m. The lights were off, and I put them on, but the printing area was pitch black. I stood and stared into the blackness, feeling like there was definitely something in there looking back. But nothing happened, and I went back to work. I hope you enjoyed my stories. Story 4. The Footman. In the mid-2000s, Shannon Wisnant was described as an entrepreneur, constantly on the search for items he could flip or sell for a quick buck. When an auction was announced for storage units in his hometown of Maiden, North Carolina, Shannon jumped at the chance, hoping to find some valuable items that would bring in some extra cash. Shannon held the winning bid on one of these storage units, and what he found inside would change his life forever. While sorting through items in the unit, Shannon came across a grill. When he opened it to assess its condition, he was greeted with a shocking sight: a mummified human leg and foot. He called 911, telling the operator, "It's plumb nasty, done grossed me out." His shock and disgust did not last long. According to Shannon's friends, his upbringing with an abusive father contributed to a longing for fame and fortune, a desire to be a beloved public figure. Shannon believed the foot was his big ticket, and immediately went to local media outlets to share his story. He began calling himself the Footman, and announced his plan to open a roadside attraction centered around his macabre find. His story became a media sensation in the area, and Shannon was a constant fixture in the local news. The media attention Shannon craved soon threw a wrench in his plans when a man named John Wood contacted him to inform him that the leg was his and to request that Shannon return it. In 2004, John and his father, Tom, a wealthy furniture store owner, set out in Tom's Cessna for a farewell flight as he had decided to sell the plane. What started as a lighthearted adventure ended in tragedy for the Wood family. The plane crashed, killing Tom and resulting in major injuries for John, including one that required his leg to be amputated below the knee. John, trying his best to cope with such a major loss, requested that the hospital return his amputated limb, intending to preserve it in memory of the crash that took his father and changed his life. He first attempted to freeze the foot, but when his power was cut off, he was forced to find a new strategy. John reached out to a friend who worked in a mortuary and was given some embalming fluid. John soaked the foot in embalming fluid and let it sun-dry for 6 months until it was mummified. Unfortunately, the crash took a huge toll on John. He was co-pilot at the time of the tragedy and blamed himself for his father's death. He began to self-medicate with alcohol and the painkillers prescribed to him after his accident. John's addiction spiraled further and further out of control until he lost his home. His foot was placed inside a grill in his storage unit when he moved his belongings out of the house. Eventually, John found himself unable to pay for the storage unit, and it was auctioned off to Shannon. Upon hearing John's story, Shannon agreed to return ownership of the foot to John under one condition. Shannon wanted to be able to display the foot in his proposed roadside attraction and promised to split the profits with John. John initially agreed, hoping that Shannon would return the leg and he could back out and get on with his life. When John spoke with the media and claimed to have no part in the deal, Shannon was furious. He continued his media campaign, now making fun of John and mocking his father's death. As it would turn out, Shannon harbored some resentment toward the Wood family. During their childhood, many people in town worked for the Wood family's furniture business. Shannon's father did not, and he often felt left out, as he was one of few children who didn't attend the birthday parties and events hosted by the Wood family. Shannon refused to return the foot, saying, "He is its birth owner, but I still feel I own it." The dispute took its toll on both men's lives. It further fueled John's addiction problem, which spiraled out of control until he found himself homeless and taking shelter beneath a bridge. Shannon dived deeper into his persona as the Footman in pursuit of further fame. He spent more and more money on websites, shirts, flyers, and other promotional items for a business that had not materialized. Eventually, his wife stated that she wanted a divorce. Shannon still continued with his pursuit, claiming he would be happy when he finally found fame and got his own TV show. In 2006, Judge Mathis caught wind of the situation and agreed to feature both men on his show to settle the dispute once and for all. Mathis scolded Shannon for his behavior toward John and ordered him to return the leg. In return, John was to reimburse Shannon for the $5,000 he paid for the storage unit. Judge Mathis further remedied the situation by offering John a chance to get clean and sober. John, who had arrived to court noticeably high, agreed, and the judge paid for the treatment facility. John would go on to find a job and get engaged to the love of his life. With the leg in his possession, he found a local vet that agreed to taxidermy the leg, allowing him to complete the memorial for his father, Tom. Shannon, however, remained bitter over the dispute, continuing to pursue fame. Despite losing the foot, he still promoted himself as the Footman, writing books, appearing on podcasts, and selling merchandise. He was eventually hired for a reality TV show, but walked away after an argument with the producers when he learned that some aspects of the show were staged. While Shannon was required to return the foot, the grill the foot was found in remained in his possession. He believed the grill was cursed and threw it into the ocean. In 2014, he was arrested for brandishing a gun at a local bank. On the same day, John reportedly won the lottery. While it wasn't a large amount, John stated, "I've seen enough bad karma, and now I'm starting to taste some of those good flavors of karma." In 2016, Shannon went on to announce his candidacy for president. Unfortunately, he would pass away in November of that year due to a heart attack. The story of the foot and its legacy is detailed in the 2015 documentary Finders Keepers, which is available on a wide variety of streaming services. In an interview about the film, John said, "I'm able now to, even on a grander scale than I could have ever thought, pay tribute to my father and pay homage to my family. If you'd like to dig deeper into this unbelievable story, this 82-minute film features interviews from both men and is very interesting, to say the least." Story 5. The Man from Taured. In 1954, a man flew into Japan and was detained by authorities after discovering the country of origin listed on his passport did not exist. John Allen Kuchar Zagres, age 36, from Taured. Authorities were confused as his passport had been stamped in many East Asian countries and did not appear to be counterfeit. During questioning, authorities asked him questions about his country of origin. He stated that Taured was a European country located between France and Spain. He insisted they must have heard of it, or at the very least that they could locate it on a map, as it had been there for nearly 1,000 years. When challenged, Zagres became visibly upset and continued to plead for authorities to investigate as he was telling the truth. Japanese authorities placed him in a guarded hotel room on a high-level floor of the hotel while they attempted to sort out the situation. The next morning, Zagres had seemingly vanished into thin air, and authorities were unable to find any clues as to where he might have gone or how he could possibly have escaped. The story would circulate for decades, but what really happened? In truth, the story is not as fascinating as we've been led to believe, and authorities have known the truth all along. John Zagres did exist and was arrested. Unfortunately, media outlets at the time latched onto the story and fabricated details to sensationalize the tale that has been repeated as truth around the world. Here is the real story of the Taured man. It was October of 1959 when John Zagres entered Japan. His passport did not raise suspicions right away, though. It wasn't until January of 1960 that he was detained on suspicion of false identity, illegal entry, and document fraud after attempting to cash foreign checks written for large amounts of money. Taured, his listed country of origin, was a big part of what tipped authorities off to his scam. The authorities did not fall for it, as was suggested in the media, and he was promptly arrested. As it turned out, Zagres had been using this counterfeit passport for quite some time, and while his passport stamps were legitimate, authorities were baffled not by his listed country of origin, but by how long he had been able to use counterfeit passports without arousing any suspicion. In an attempt to prove his innocence, Zagres gave a detailed backstory about different countries he had lived in, armies he had served in, and battles he had fought, and the work he had done with foreign agencies. These stories were easily proven false by contacting said agencies, and Zagres was revealed to be nothing more than a fraud. In August of 1960, Zagres was sentenced to 1 year in prison and subsequently deported. So how did we end up with the tale of a man who traveled from a parallel universe? When the case was first reported in the Canadian newspaper The Province, it is thought that a typo turned the country Tuareg into Taured, and the rumors began to swirl. Like a game of telephone, facts were added and assumptions were made until we ended up with a story about a man who unwittingly traveled from a parallel dimension to our universe and seemingly disappeared the way he came. In the decades since Zagres was tried and convicted of fraud, it has become an urban legend not just in the area it occurred, but around the globe. It is still a popular tale to this day, and the fraudulent Mr. Zagres continues his legacy of deception via media sensationalism. Inexplicable Occurrence in Red River Gorge, Kentucky, by Then Building 9493. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this incident and wanted to see if it resonates with anyone else. Me, 28-year-old male, my wife, 28-year-old female, and dog, male, 3, recently went to Red River Gorge, a state park in southeast Kentucky. We're no strangers to camping in the park, having been there at least 20 times over the past 8 years. We chose a spot I've been to 2 to 3 times before. It's worth noting that this site is outside of other dispersed camping areas and is essentially the only proper spot with car parking along a 2-mile stretch of road. There's a dilapidated barn about a mile up from where we drove in, and a cemetery about 1/3 of a mile in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it's a rarely traveled road, and we saw no one all day, just an occasional car, maybe 1 or 2 an hour. The spot is at the base of a 30-foot incline that a 4x4 could handle. Our SUV was parked horizontally at the top, blocking other vehicles from descending. From there, it's about 30 yards into the campground, with another slope leading to the river's edge and swimming hole. The day went great. We spent time near the beach, letting our dogs swim, then did typical camping activities like hiking, foraging, chopping wood, throwing the hatchet, and enjoying a few beers. Once sunlight began to fade around 6:30, we started the fire and began cooking dinner. As darkness fell and the last light disappeared, we heard the usual sounds: squirrels rustling, things falling into the leaves, which spooked my wife a bit, but we didn't think much of it. Then, at about 9 p.m., sitting around the healthy fire and listening to music, we heard heavy shuffling in the leaves, definitely something large or heavy. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the road, about halfway between us and our car. I stopped the music, and after about 10 seconds of dead silence, we heard the shuffling again. Before I could call out, we heard this strange and unnatural noise, something like a throttling, ascending pitch mixed with a shriek. Neither of us can verbally describe it, and I can confidently say I've never heard anything like it before. It was about 20 to 25 feet away, just outside the reach of my headlamp. Our dog went insane, hair standing on end, barking incessantly into the darkness. He was on a long lead, or I'm sure he would have taken off after it. My wife and I were frozen. I was holding my hatchet and trying to catch any movement or sound to track. After about 2 to 3 minutes of that, with no further noises, I calmed the dog, and we grabbed some essentials and hurried to the car. Our adrenaline was pumping as we discussed coyotes, foxes, or other animals as the possible culprits. I didn't want to mention the possibility of people, as that would have heightened the paranoia. We eventually passed out after about an hour, but I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep, feeling very uncomfortable both mentally and physically. I've always struggled to sleep any way except fully horizontal. At around 3 a.m., right next to my head, I heard a singular knock on my window, like someone tapped the glass with one knuckle. My wife didn't wake up, and I scanned the outside of the car, but didn't see or hear anything. I struggled to doze off again, and my heartbeat was rapid. When we finally got the first light around 7 a.m., we cooked breakfast, packed up our campsite, and got the hell out of Dodge. No prints or anything out of sorts with our remaining belongings either. What's strange to me is that after hearing the noise, we heard no additional heavy shuffling from the source. With our dog barking so aggressively, we should have heard whatever it was moving away. We've looked up various animal noises native to the gorge, and nothing even remotely resembles what we heard. The knock on the window was also isolated. There were no other noises or visible happenings outside the car immediately following. Lastly, I had a thought the day after we left. I remember whistling for our dog after dark, since we had some scraps to give him near the fire. Immediately I thought, shit, I shouldn't have whistled. But up until this trip, I've never been a believer of those superstitions. I just like to respect the folklore I've heard. In hindsight, we're now convinced I may have invited a Wendigo or skinwalker to our camp. I won't take those superstitions lightly again. And I'm sure this occurrence will affect at least my next few overnights in those woods. What is Happening in Central Texas by NaidaBelle. Last Thursday, I, 34 female, spent the day hanging out with my friend, 20 female, in the Texas Hill Country. Her family home is out in the hills, aka the boonies, where everyone lives on large acreage and you can easily go a mile without seeing a guard light, never mind a house. In front and behind their property are sparsely wooded pasture. Neighbors on one side are a stone's throw away and know the family by name. On the other side, they're well acquainted but live far enough that they drive a side-by-side when they come to visit. There's enough traffic on the road for the county to maintain a patchwork oil top, but not enough to be bothered painting the faded center stripe. I explain all of this so y'all are not just aware of the landscape I'm in, but also why there is zero fucking reason for anyone to be here after dark that isn't meant to be. Late in the evening, about 10 to 11, I spent an hour alone on the well-lit porch of the main house, having a serious conversation on the phone with my partner who's currently long distance. The entire time, I forced myself to power through the sensation of being watched. It was unsettling, but didn't feel dangerous enough to warrant going inside where I'd lose signal. Towards the end of my call, my friend comes out to have a smoke, and we chat a little more before she takes me home. I live in town, and since we weren't quite done talking, we hung out in her car at my apartment complex until about 1 a.m. I tell her to text me when she got home to know she made it safe and share some pictures we had talked about. She does, and I assume all is well until the following morning. After going back and forth about whether it would sound crazy, she calls me to tell me that there was a gigantic barn owl just sitting in the middle of the road about a quarter mile before her house. The damn thing doesn't seem spooked at all that she's almost hit it, and just sits there, staring in her direction, until she manages to move around it and finish her drive home. We've grown up with conflicting folklore about whether this is a good or bad omen, but ultimately drop it. The night before last, she and another friend bring me to a kickback at the family home of the second friend about a mile from the first place. Throughout the night, despite their large backyard being fenced, I still cannot shake the feeling of being watched. I chalk it up to being nervous, and anyone who might be watching me is doing so because I'm a newcomer to the social group. We're all a little too tipsy for me to go all the way back to town, so I go home with my first friend to the property I described before. Same feeling while having smoke on the porch before calling it a night, and I assume she was getting it on with her husband after she went into their bedroom, because I swear I can vaguely hear them on a baby monitor. When I teased her yesterday morning about solving her horny problem, she denies they've done anything, and she's not shy about her sex life. And he later confirmed separately that they were too cross-faded to do anything but sleep. I found out later that the monitor was off. I spent the entire day with my friend, hanging out with her family, making a couple trips into town, etc. Just before sunset, we stopped by a third friend's place to pick up some stuff, and he repeatedly teases his kid about riding an e-bike through the pasture because the skinwalkers will get ya. Unbeknownst to me, my friend is equally spooked by how many times he says it, because she has also been feeling watched since the night before. While sitting on the porch again, chatting and eating some finger-licking, slap-your-grandma, this-could-have-been-my-last-meal-good stir-fry her husband made for us, I get an unexpected phone call from my own partner at about 10 p.m. We're barely a few minutes into the call before my friend and I start to repeatedly hear a strange noise we can't identify. I tell my man to hold on a second while I turn down the volume on my speakerphone, trying to figure out what the noise is. While I'm listening intently to see if it's coming from his end of the line, my friend's face becomes progressively more terrified. Suddenly, there's the sound of what can only be described as a mortally wounded animal screaming. Y'all, I've heard plenty of wildlife and livestock sounds in my life, This ain't no goat, sheep, cow, horse, chicken, dog, cat, coyote, whitetail, or axis I've ever heard. Bobcats and pumas don't strike the fear of the Lord into you that this thing did. It ain't no curse-sounding fox, and it definitely ain't any overexcited squirrel. We said fuck every worldly possession we had, including our plates of that god-tier stir-fry and her car keys, and bolted indoors with only the phones in our hands. It's only after my partner has heard this commotion and our call dropped due to lost signal that my friend and I ask each other again, what the fuck was that? After agreeing neither of us could identify what animal made that sound, she tells me the most horrific part. The earlier sound that was repeating as it made its way down the fence line and came to a stop at her front gate. The last 3 times it repeated, she distinctly heard a voice saying, "Hey! Hey, come here!" After locking up, we decided we'd go back to clean our stuff off the porch after the sun comes up this morning. While she's been in bed with her husband and baby, I've been sitting awake in the living room on the pull-out bed, listening to the jump scares of the ice maker, the occasional knock on the wall, the odd soft scratch at the door, and the vague baby monitor voices from the previous night again. The only part of this story worse than losing almost an entire plate of stir-fry, topped with the most perfectly spiced beef and mushrooms that I was too cowardly to die for, is that it's not fiction. I'm watching the clock with my shoes on, too scared to sleep before dawn. Update. After my friend woke up, she told me about the angry text she received from her mother about the mess we left on the porch. She said she had come outside to smoke at 2:45 a.m., and all was normal except for the fight their pit bulls had over my almost full plate. At first, she accused us of laziness and didn't take things that seriously. After we sat down with her and fully explained what happened, she cut us some slack for being afraid, but still insisted that we basically fed off each other's fear and convinced ourselves the incident was worse than it truly was. Creepy sounds just happen late at night, out in the country sometimes. Over the course of the day, doing housework, playing with the baby, talking about my impending engagement and wedding plans, we began to convince ourselves that her mother might have been right. Until she took me home. She put the baby down at 6:30 p.m., and with her husband there to hold down the fort, immediately drove me home. At 7, just as we were settling in at my place, her mother calls to tell us that the dogs were alerting in an extremely aggressive way to the opposite side of the garage, a huge garage that my friend's apartment is built in, the side that their bedroom window is on. Growling, snarling, fur bristled, very out of character for them. When she peeked around the corner to see what they were reacting to, nothing was there. Even after she calmed them down and coaxed them back to the porch of the main house, they would not stop staring at the garage. When my friend returned home a bit after midnight, she called me to make sure she made it into her place safely because she had felt the creepy watched feeling again, but made it inside uneventfully. As far as I know, nothing new has happened in the last 24 hours. If there are any further updates, I'll be sure to let you know. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dread Weaver. I'll be back next week with more terrifying true tales. If you would like to submit a story of your own, head to our subreddit r/thedreadweaver or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications if you want to hear more. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dreadweaver, signing off.